What is stupefying about Borderlands 3's arms race is that it feels like 10 years later. Gearbox is both the closest they've ever been and the furthest they've ever been from cracking the code. Routinely, post Borderlands 2, Gearbox has thrown in all the ingredients that made 1 and 2 congeal into mega classics, without the same effect. The pre-sequel is a shotgun spread of all things Borderlands. Solid writing, and yet somehow for all it's basically being Borderlands 2, just isn't the same. A few new gimmicks does not a classic make. Perhaps like Mom's Meatloaf, perfect on Tuesday after work, not as good Thursday, and I'm just plain sick of it by Sunday. Gearbox has grown too afraid to evolve through risk-taking. And at this stage, the risks are worth taking. If another risk, like Battleborn, is taken, thoroughly tested, gamified, and refined for the first time since Battleborn, Gearbox will be able to create something truly unique again. Think about Arms Race. What comes to my mind first is that I specifically remember Randy Pitchford saying of Risk of Rain 2 that this is the kind of game Gearbox would make. They published it through their burgeoning publishing branch, and the world knows Risk of Rain 2 rocks. The procedural systems are one of those rarefied animals that instead of random for the sake of random, the randomness is an essential fluid in the mechanics. Skills play out against high risk and high reward gameplay, all against a backdrop of randomness where the player never knows from one run to the next whether or not this one might be the one. That one run where all the power-ups play into their hand and they become godlike. And when they are godlike, with that comes not just the end, but the knowledge that they can begin to explore the later stages of the end game. They can go for specific victories like high scores or unlocking new characters with lunar coins. I mentioned stupefying because Arms Race has this baked right into it, seemingly by accident. Legendaries feel like legendaries. It's one thing that you will see attached to Arms Race more than anything. It's the one slogan that sticks, the one thing that feels good about Arms Race. Legendaries feel like legendaries. If you get a hold of a legendary TD or shotgun early in a run, the power rush is identical to some of the greatest thrills felt in a roguelike. So for the first time since Borderlands 1 or vanilla Borderlands 2 when the level cap was 50, picking up a legendary in Arms Race results in this instant power-up. Excitement follows the orange beam of light. Slaughter exhales from that orange beam turned pickup. But then, that's it. A staple of roguelikes is power against randomness. Players in Risk of Rain 2, for instance, can offer to end a run early as a sacrifice for later runs, unlocking lunar coins. In my favorite roguelike, Atomic Crops, death in the early going is rewarded with cornucopias, which can be used to buy permanent power-ups for later runs. These are both indies, with small teams, especially Atomic Crops. Borderlands is a billion-dollar franchise. Risk of Rain 2 is $15 on Xbox. Atomic Crops is $15 on Xbox. This is $30. So, in Gearbox's overpriced $30 roguelike, you shoot stuff and almost akin to a Roblox game, there's some fun to be had almost as if by cosmic mistake. The designers didn't necessarily intend some of the fun of roguelikes with legendary pickups, for instance, to bleed in, as no other elements of Arms Race follow suit. So I can't explain it any other way. I can't believe they intended that to be designed that way, or else they would have continued from there. Arms Race has death that results in progress lost. Arms Race has a semi-procedural design in which mobs spawn, but the chests are set and the legendary drops are assigned. I get that during this time of COVID, we're supposed to cut some slack as teams work remotely. But it's even the little things that disappoint here. There's fun, in fact, there's fun in spite of Arms Race itself. There's fun because Borderlands is Borderlands, and 3 is the best shooter they've made to this point. And one of the best things that Gearbox has and still has is their procedural loot system. So getting to go back as a high-level player and getting to play with new guns is of course exciting. There just isn't a reason or anything else to hold you as a purpose towards doing so. So when I say little things, I mean even extracting in games like The Cycle, or I'll refer to it often since Gearbox feels that that's what they would have made, Risk of Rain 2, extraction is an exciting process. Extraction means a boss battle, waves of enemy, then a satisfying animation that adds closure and gives the player feedback necessary to cement their accomplishment. In Arms Race, the player walks up to a computer module, plugs in 5 pieces of loot. Why just 5, by the way? There's no real point to this arbitrary 5. It doesn't trigger a tough decision. You usually don't even get 5 pieces of gear worth taking out. And then anticlimactically, you hit the extract button. The first time I beat the mode, I had zero idea I'd even beat. Nothing queued. It was totally unsatisfactory. There was nothing to indicate that I had succeeded. I was given a fast travel station and a module to extract, And that's it. There wasn't even an audio cue like run complete. Congratulations. No audio cues, no animations, zero. Most disappointingly is there's no theater or story involving Salvador or Axton, who are used here just to use them, as if to check the box and continue to sell it to many a loyalist Borderlands fan on nostalgia. They play virtually zero role in the game. Their dialogue is often trite and meaningless. They have zero animations. They don't show up as NPCs. So, after I stood there for a good 10 to 15 minutes trying to figure out whether I'd really won or lost, I eventually traveled to Sanctuary thinking I'd probably done something clearly wrong and would have to figure it out. So I looked everywhere. I thought, okay, maybe there's a special mailbox for the courier, or perhaps I go and I debrief with Axton and Salvador for a mission accomplished. Because, again, this is $30, and the two roguelikes that I have, all the roguelikes, Neon Abyss and Atomic Ops and Risk of Rain 2 and For the King and all these that are much cheaper than this, which are all indies, which I've all enjoyed, all have at least some kind of feedback at the end to all either have some closure or feedback to indicate victory or loss conditions and give the closure that at least acknowledges you've done something. But that is not an arms race. No, the guns extracted show up in one's bank. That's it. That's the end of arms race. More bizarrely is that arms race isn't a separate way to play, as in you go to the main menu and just queue into arms race, which would seem appropriate. Instead, it's just an area where the players can go to with the purpose of farming legendaries only specific to that area. And of course, once you get those legendaries, it means that whole area is done with. So similar to takedowns and trials, but of course players are more willing to do takedowns since it's proper endgame. But it makes no sense that arms race isn't a separate mode altogether, where the rewards are brought into your base game, but it completely fits perfectly the mold that Trials was going for. I am all for unique legendaries in arms race. I think that the events done around the Trials, which unbelievably feel like a lifetime ago because that's pre-COVID and pre-everything, but those were good and should have been made permanent because they cemented the purpose of the Trials. They cemented the role that the Trials have in the Borderlands 3 content loop and gave them a specific purpose. And I think takedowns are in a good place. I'm more of a contrarian here. I feel that takedowns are an expansion on the Borderlands vision of raid bosses. I think that raid bosses should be in the game. They should be around as a solo thing. I don't know why Verminivorous isn't still in the game, but I think that takedowns are good. I think that trials are good. I think takedowns are good. The key difference is the player is taking their Vault Hunter, skill trees, gear, guardian rank, etc. into continued adventures within that world. Arms race is you take a generic character in without a skill tree. Now, I'm not saying there should be a skill tree. In fact, I think that would break everything about that experience. What I'm saying is arms race is so close to being what Trials promised to be, a way to jump in, get some loot and XP, jump out. Something that with love and polish could have been excellent. Truly. And I mean that. This isn't a video that says scrap arms race, it's just junk. It's a video saying arms race could really be amazing, but they didn't do enough. And so to continue on that point, arms race should be separate. First and foremost, you could easily separate arms race out from the rest of the game. It should be free to play. And I mean that. It should be free to play. Arms race would be an excellent demo for players who haven't yet accessed Borderlands 3, and I feel like it needs it because there's been so much waning interest in it. You make it effectively a demo, and that gear that you earned in arms race is waiting for you in the bank if you buy the game. But with that, you then need to make it great in order to sell copies of the game. You'll be able to fill matchmaking lobbies for arms race so people are getting their Borderlands in. You're going to get new eyeballs on the game, but then you need to make it great. The idea that there's a continuity with arms race in the main game ought to only apply in extracting loot. Again, that thing where you just fast travel. Put specific legendaries in there, yes, but make arms race a proper farming area like the slaughterhouses. As in, Gearbox, if you don't do this, almost assuredly, the mode will die within a month once people have garnered what they want to get out of it and they're just plain bored of it. You created a completely new experience which has the right base, but because you didn't add enough to it, it will die soon. How does Gearbox make it great? Put their 10 years of experience in trying to make a mode like this work to the test. Test their metal. Put the pedal to the metal. Even easier. Look at that game that they said, hey, Randy said, hey, this is a game we would make. Look at what works across roguelikes. Power versus risk versus reward. It's a golden formula, and it's why those games are so fun to play right now. What plays out in Arms Race is a pattern a decade in the making for Gearbox. Close, yet so far. Gearbox is seemingly always aware that a horde-style mode in Arena fits like a glove into their looter-shooter mold, so their first attempt with Moxxi's Underdome gets the first part right, 3 short arenas with a valuable reward in skill points and bank space, then completely collapses under the weight under the long arenas that last endless hours and are scaled so as to make the challenge feel arbitrarily unfair and abhorrently repetitive, with greens and blues and a worthless certificate as the reward. I argue in my capstone for Borderlands 1 how this mode could have been excellent with a roguelike style. Gearbox would have been so far ahead of the curve here. A generic Vault Hunter, a level cap of 20, no guns at the start, a test of all skills core to Borderlands. How do you spec? How do you gear? How well do you shoot? I saw here 3 unique classes: DPS, support, and CC, crowd control. Build 100 generic skills and 25 caps. Put them into a dice roll. I pick a support class, say. I get a random combo of those skills that are labeled under support and a capstone. Go. That was the furthest thing than what we got, of course, but I can conjecture and dream after all. Their next attempt, the beloved and best title of Gearbox's library, Borderlands 2 Slaughterhouses. As with most things Borderlands, Borderlands 2 came the closest to getting it right. The Slaughterhouse designers ostensibly understood what worked with the Underdome and Borderlands 1's arenas, acknowledging that they were short, good XP fetchers, and offered a unique weapon at the end. Borderlands 2 had an innate grasp that questing was best rewarded through a powerful build-changing unique weapon. Borderlands 2 didn't reach here. They just said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The sequel does everything else, either one of a kind, its unique advantage, in fact, and where Borderlands 2 chose not to be innovative, they just did things superbly well. So, 2's attempt at this formula isn't spectacular. It's only noteworthy in the sense that they clearly understood the most fundamental element did work in the Borderlands 1 arenas, even with Underdome's failings, and created Borderlands 2's arenas accordingly. The pre-sequel made an entire DLC out of the Slaughterhouses, and managed inexplicably to repeat nearly every mistake of Mad Moxxi's Underdome, half a decade later. The whys and hows escape me. So, when we get to 3, one would think that through all this trial and error, that 3 would be the next logical step. However, instead of reinventing the wheel, they just made more wheels, to the point of redundancy. Trials are a great alternative to Slaughterhouses, but Slaughterhouses exist and just plain old-fashioned trump them because they're more effective. This is a video game after all, and what players do with games is optimize and break them. The Slaughterdomes have boiled down into that thing players do for quick loot. Trials are well made, but useless. And then there's takedowns, the challenging evolution of raid bosses that the most popular content creators for Borderlands will test their builds against to prove a point, but otherwise players just seem to wish were raid bosses. Which brings us to our final offering, Borderlands 3's Arms Race, a mode 10 years in the making. As I approach this end, let me say that the over effect of looking back not just at Borderlands 3 to this point, but at the franchise as a whole, is wondering, as a fan, if the game's legacy is quickly accelerating toward an event horizon conclusion of what could have been. Borderlands 3 launched financially well, but the ripple effect was more of a sputter than a wave. For over a year, despite one of the best pre-launch orchestrations of marketing and influencers ever, a combination of Twitch tools, sponsorships, and events, the effect remains that Borderlands is facing an ever-decreasing relevancy. Borderlands 3 is to an extent Borderlands 2. Borderlands 2 was groundbreaking, was that magnum opus, the Borderlands thing taken to its fullest potential, even a final DLC that added effervescence and gear sets. Yet another missed opportunity of Arms Race, which I'll touch on in a little bit. Then there's Borderlands 3, and 3 says, hey, remember they've kept working on it. They've not bowed down to the live service gods. God bless them. They've not sacrificed to the microtransaction idol. God bless them. Yet their biggest content creators went from views in the hundreds of thousands to tens of thousands. The Twitch numbers are rarely over 1,000 viewers. I find myself trying my damnedest to love it and put hours in, only to get bored moments later. Borderlands is potentially on a journey towards becoming a victim of its own success, akin to To Kill a Mockingbird with Harper Lee. The formula is so effective, and when it first broke through, absolutely cutting edge, but now seemingly stuck in time. Borderlands 2 was supreme for its understanding of what worked and all but reinventing it. The procedural loot molded from parts, badass ranks, world bosses, specific loot pools. Sure, I'm far from Arms Race, but how odd is it that both pre-sequel and Borderlands 3 had to have this core mechanic of Borderlands 2 patched into the game post hoc? Which is to say, are they not learning going forward from mistakes like they did from Borderlands 1 to Borderlands 2, which made Borderlands 2 so great? So I'm not one to just complain without solutions. Here's what Arms Race needs in my opinion. Skill ups. Just like any roguelike, a run is defined by what skills you get early and often. Each of the 4 Vault Hunters should come in with their choice of abilities, be it pet or drone, whatever, from the core 4 abilities. But scattered on the field are 25 to 50 skill buffs that last for the run that add to their abilities. You might get lucky and get 10 gun damage stacks from a extra hot barrel, a steaming hot barrel. You might find a bandolier, and that gives you 15% ammo regeneration or 25% reload speed, etc. You get my point. If you've played roguelikes before, you know what I'm going for here. But mixed into these should be 10 to 15 legendary skills, which change the game entirely. Let's imagine they did make Arms Race free to play as a demo to sell more copies. These changes would be a must. If you're going to make a roguelike, make it a proper roguelike. Guns and skill pickups. There needs to be more loot and more loot extraction, period. They are obviously not going to redesign the map or turn it into a procedural dungeon. They've done too much work at this point to do that. But I do think that Arms Race is going to need and could get more maps just by taking maps from planets all around the main game and taking the largest areas from each planet and turning them into suitable Arms Race maps. I do believe that the large areas from each planet are suitable for Arms Race maps with some tinkering, and then once the Arms Race rules are applied to them, would make an excellent way to break up the repetition that Arms Race is soon to incur for the player base. The third thing is to get rid of the BR rules. They don't belong here. Get rid of the ring altogether. I want to explore. I want to see the map. I want to fight the bosses. From Atomicrops to For the King to Risk of Rain 2, the way they punish longer, deeper runs is risk versus reward. That core thing that Arms Race decided to mostly forfeit. All that needs to happen is that the mode gets harder the more time goes on. Again, exactly like Risk of Rain 2, the game that they said they would make. Just put it on a timer. They've already baked this in fact, as the run does get harder the longer you're in your run. So just get rid of the ring. Put it on a timer. The more time spent in the arena, the harder it's going to get. The more challenging. But of course, with challenge comes reward. The more challenging but necessary changes that need to be brought to this. 1, it needs to be worth it. More loot that's worth extracting and relevant and abundant needs to explode from enemies. 2, if a run has failed, reward the player for just having tried it. XP for Guardian ranks for endgame players is fine, temporary solution, but the best solution is, like all other roguelikes, a sense of continuity. And For the King, it's being able to buy new characters and even different challenging pursuits when you're doing a run. In Risk of Rain 2, it's lunar coins for powerful buffs during a run, or new characters in the void, or unique portals for better loot. In Atomicrops, it's permanent increases in power, time, and abilities. For Borderlands, I think it should be effervescent gear, playing off of Borderlands 2's last DLC. Give the player arms coins, or whatever you'd like to call them, that can be spent at a vendor unique to Arms Race. These include, which would also put Salvador and Action in the game. They can be the vendors. Salvador can sell the gear, which is appropriate to him, and Axton the buffs, challenges, and skills that could change up the runs. And of course, these would include some items that are just sinks for players to spend coins on, like getting to start a run off with a blue or green weapon, but also more expensive and permanent power-ups like effervescent items that encourage replayability in deeper runs. A long run that would mimic Risk of Rain 2's Diluvian, say, is only possible through loading in with effervescence, or just putting effervescence in the pool once you've bought them, like For the King. And For the King, you buy the option that maybe you'll have a powerful boss encounter which can give you X loot. You don't just get it off the start. So the player need not even load in with them. They can just be added to the loot pool, so that there's a chance of a god run, as we touched in the beginning. So core to the essence of fun that roguelikes produce. When the player gains an entire effervescent loadout, which gives bonuses like movement speed, bonus damage, more time, all specific to Arms Race, and manages to get a few legendary skills together, again, specific to Arms Race, then we're off on a great run that feels truly unique to Borderlands, but with that adrenaline needle shot of fun that only roguelikes can produce. The final suggestion, the final thing, is that bosses need to be way more prevalent. From Digistruct Peak to the pre-sequel's Holodome, Borderlands always plays with the idea that there's a metaverse of augmented reality within the actuality. It's not difficult to create a canon where all 10 years of Borderlands enemies, bosses, mobs, and even more excitingly old loot from their sources. Say, imagine Ninetoes scouring the arena, cursing that he's been rebuilt for the nth time in this hell, dropping a clipper. The potential is here. The potential, I hope, wasn't there, which is to say, you could have every boss and mob across the Borderlands franchise and their weapon be randomly around the map, which would further decrease the repetition and keep it fresh and exciting for the player. For $30, and yes, I know it includes more than Arms Race, but that's still a premium price for a skill tree, and at this point, an unknown piece of content, and $30 is ultimately a lot to ask in the midst of a pandemic and a recession. I got toilet paper to buy, damn it. Unfortunately, at this point, for Arms Race, like Mayhem Mode before it, the excitement was there, the hype was there, the potential is there, the pre-release info seemed to be on point, but the reality was and is different. Decisions are made that leave myself and others scratching their heads at how Borderlands as a franchise continues to be so near right, but either doesn't go the extra mile or missteps right as they're about to cross the finish line. The difference is with Borderlands 2, the vision was clear. They dotted the I's, crossed their T's, tightened down all the nuts and bolts for smooth sailing. Since that moment, there's this feeling established from the resulting sequels of just hurling the thing out there. Prototyping and design theory are well and good, but if one's prototype is broken, no amount of refining will ever fix it. It's not that Borderlands is broken, but seems stuck in time. When I play Borderlands 3, I always get this sense is that they went and they got all the pieces of Frankenstein together, and they went and they flipped the switch to awaken the creature. It's alive! But the parts, they weren't stitched together right. And they still aren't stitched together right. Arms Race at launch just feels as if another missed opportunity. All the parts are there, but not stitched together. And in the case of Arms Race, even missing parts. As Borderlands, thanks to its extremely well-managed PR construct, manages not an ounce of mainstream criticisms. From their regulated forums to the Borderlands show, God love Borderlands, the passions of fury that made Destiny an empty vessel into the winner of this generation, haven't been allowed or able to scream out. There's also that Borderlands is never bad, but never quite great either. The entire industry, including gamers, just seem to be in a different space. They've moved on. What was groundbreaking 10 years ago, revolutionary even 7 years ago, is in the year of our Lord 2020 old news. 200,000 people watch who will be voted out of the airlock. It's all changing again. So, Arms Race was an excellent idea to re-enter the threshold for Borderlands. But the half-hearted effort, which isn't personal, just how it plays and comes across, can't get the franchise back to where it once was. This continued pace of mediocre kills all passionate intensity for fans and critics alike. This means that views continue to drop, interest continues to wane. And for all its goodwill, the franchise's growth is stunted by simple lack of want and will and concern, and so goes the pull of the ever-closening event horizon.